Good evening and welcome to Qnews 2024 wrap-up on the ongoing crisis in Gaza. This year, Gaza has faced an unparalleled humanitarian catastrophe with relentless airstrikes, widespread destruction and deepening displacement crisis. Over 40,000 Palestinians have lost their lives, thousands have been injured, and the region's infrastructure has been completely devastated. As we reflect on the key moments of 2024, we will look at the toll of this conflict, the international community's response, and the dire conditions that continue to unfold. Stay with us as we break down the impact of this crisis on Gaza's population and its future.
My office charges Netanyahu and Gallant as co-perpetrators and as superiors in the commission of these alleged crimes.
سنقف ضد جميع المخططات التي تستهدف تصفية القضية الفلسطينية.
Starting with the latest developments in Gaza, the Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has condemned Israel's destruction of Jabalia as a flagrant disregard for international law. It accused Israel of committing genocide, targeting hospitals, and using starvation as a weapon, while forcibly displacing Palestinians amid harsh winter conditions. The ministry also criticized Israel's actions in Gaza and the West Bank, alleging land annexation under the guise of settler expansion. It urged the UN Security Council to take action, citing relevant resolutions and the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice. Israeli occupation forces have raided Al-Isawiyya in occupied East Jerusalem, issuing demolition orders for homes and structures under the pretext of unauthorized construction. Since October 7, 2023, over 433 demolitions have taken place in Jerusalem, including forced self-demolitions to avoid steep fines. Palestinians face systematic denial of building permits, violating international law and their right to housing as part of Israel's efforts to forcibly displace them while expanding settlements in and around the city. Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid has accused Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of blocking a detainee exchange deal for political gain. Lapid stated that Netanyahu fears losing support from extremist partners, despite the deal being feasible as early as 8 months ago. He criticized the ongoing Gaza war, claiming it no longer serves Israel's security interests, lacks strategic objectives, and results in daily soldier casualties. Lapid also called for a comprehensive agreement with Hamas after the war.
I believe that any political interests should be set aside for this. This is way more important. Israel as a nation.
The Gaza government media office has reported that 7 displaced individuals have died from severe cold and freezing temperatures, warning of more fatalities due to the tragic conditions faced by the Palestinians. Nearly the entire population has been displaced by Israeli attacks, leaving them in dire conditions. The office condemned Israel's actions, which have caused civilian suffering and the destruction of homes, pushing Palestinians to extreme levels of hardship. Amnesty International has called on Israel to release detained health workers, including the director of Kamal Adwan Hospital, without delay and unconditionally. Expressing deep concern over his fate, Amnesty urged the international community to act urgently to end what it termed Israel's genocide in Gaza. The WHO has reported that Kamal Adwan Hospital is now non-functional after an Israeli raid, leaving northern Gaza without critical healthcare services. Gaza-based health authorities have also announced that there was a death toll from Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip that has climbed over 45,400 and over 108,000 wounded. The medical reports said that at least 9 Palestinians were killed and dozens of others wounded in an Israeli airstrike on Al-Maghazi refugee camp in central Gaza Strip. Egypt has strongly condemned Israel's systematic targeting of Gaza's healthcare infrastructure, including the recent evacuation of Kamal Adwan Hospital, which was the last major health facility in northern Gaza. In a statement issued by the Foreign Ministry, Egypt called this a blatant aggression and violation of international laws and norms, accusing Israel of making northern Gaza uninhabitable to forcibly displace residents. Egypt urged international accountability mechanisms and decisive UN action to stop these violations, emphasizing the urgent need to end the war, halt brutal practices, and ensure unhindered humanitarian aid. Israeli media has reported that the Jerusalem District Court agreed to a request by the Israeli Prime Minister to cancel hearings scheduled for this week in his criminal trial, as he is set to undergo surgery today. It added that court trials are expected to resume next week. Netanyahu reportedly suffered an infection due to a benign prostate tumor, for which he will undergo surgery to remove it. The Ministry of Health in Gaza has announced the death of a 5th child in the Gaza Strip due to severe cold and a lack of heating resources, amid the harsh conditions faced by thousands of Palestinians living in displacement tents. The 5 children passed away within a week, with doctors confirming that they froze to death as a result of the extreme cold in the refugee camps, which lack blankets and winter clothing necessary to protect against the harsh weather conditions. Meanwhile, the Palestinian news agency reported the deaths of 8 Palestinians and the injury of others in an Israeli airstrike that targeted Al-Wafa hospital in the center of Gaza City. The agency stated that Israeli artillery shelled the upper floor of Al-Wafa hospital, resulting in the martyrdom of 8 civilians and injuring others, including some in critical condition. Additionally, an Israeli drone strike targeted an area near the displaced persons' tents Yarmouk Stadium on Al-Wahda Street in central Gaza City. The World Health Organization (WHO) has reported that 70,000 Palestinians are trapped in northern Gaza, with their lives at risk. The occupation army continues to destroy the infrastructure of hospitals in Gaza, particularly in the northern region. Israeli forces have focused their attacks on Kamal Adwan Hospital, setting it on fire and forcing patients and healthcare staff to evacuate under the threat of gunfire. "2024 has been marked as one of the most brutal years in the West Bank, with Israeli aggression leading to widespread destruction and loss of life. Nearly 12,000 Palestinians were arrested, around 800 died, and 6,500 were injured. Israel's military operations and extremist settler attacks have left the region in turmoil, causing severe economic losses and widespread damage to infrastructure. For further analysis on the Israeli aggressions in the West Bank, we're joined from Ramallah by Fatah spokesperson Mr. Abdel Fattah Dawla. Welcome to Q News, sir. Let me start by asking you, what factors have contributed to the escalation of Israeli aggression in the West Bank in 2024?
Greetings to you and your viewers, and we hope that the coming year will be a year that is more positive than this one, which has been characterized by genocide, apartheid, starvation to the Palestinian people. Of course, it's been a year full of bloodshed, and we hope that this doesn't get perpetuated into the new year. In fact, what is governing the Israeli state right now is the right-wing extremist sects which want to liquidate the Palestinian cause altogether and to perpetuate apartheid and genocide practices against the Palestinian people, and want to demolish the future of the Palestinian people in order to establish the Greater Israel, as they call it. In fact, the other thing regarding the international community deficit in the face of the massacres taking place in Palestine over the course of 15 consecutive months of genocide right now, regarding that, I would say that because of the international community's lapse and deficit relative to countering these atrocities, the Israeli state right now feels that it can achieve impunity and that it is beyond punishment and even condemnation. In fact, the mindset that governs the Israeli state is a bloodshed mindset and a warring set. In fact, as well, the international community with its different organizations, the fact that it had kept on evading and trying, it had kept on disregarding these atrocities, this is something that actually proves how weak the international community is when it comes to establishing or supporting the Palestinian cause and helping in establishing the Palestinian independent state along the borders of 1967, which is something that is actually guaranteed and mentioned elaboratively in international instruments. The international community, I would say, cannot operationalize its own instruments, the instruments that it had ratified in the first place.
So how have the Israeli occupation military operations in the West Bank actually affected the daily lives of the Palestinians?
In fact, in the Gaza Strip, as you are seeing on screens moment by moment, the Gaza Strip is actually turning into an inhabitable region. In fact, 85% of the Strip has been demolished altogether, and the population there don't have access to shelter, to food, to basic services, and so the Gaza Strip is 100% inhabitable. In fact, in the West Bank, the situation is kind of different, but not vastly different, though, because there is a siege happening there and a complete ripping of the resources of the Palestinian people in the West Bank. Of course, all the resources of the Palestinian people are looted by the Israeli occupation forces. And in fact, 2 years ago, when Smotrich, in fact, announced the plan of ending the conflict with us, the termination plan. In fact, after he launched this statement, he, with his government, of course, kept on intensifying arrests for thousands of Palestinians, and kept on even intensifying the siege and the barricade in the Palestinian territories in order to operationalize what they called the termination plan or the Hasma plan. In fact, as well, Israel is right now imposing offensives and aggressions on everything Palestinian. Infrastructure, different areas, different facilities. And the Palestinian people, of course, has lived a year that is the most difficult in the history of the Palestinian cause. And we recognize very well that in Palestine we are living our most difficult era in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank alike.
So all these violations carried out by the Israeli occupation army is even compounded by the settler activities and violence. What is the impact of settler violence on the Palestinian population in the region?
In fact, the Minister of the Internal Security or Homeland Security in Israel has armed tens of thousands of settlers in the West Bank in different ways. He provided them with heavy weaponry and light weaponry, and he called these armed population or disarmed population the National Army. He even gave them a name. As well, right now, the settlers of Israel are actually armed, and they keep on using their arms against the Palestinian people. Right now, they are assaulting the Palestinian population, and they enjoy a legal coverage for that as well by their own government. These settlers have been assaulting Palestinian farmers and have burned tens of olive trees and cultivated lands and fields. The settlers have as well burnt the Palestinian people alive in their households as they were sleeping. This happened over and over again. They as well keep on attacking vehicles of Palestinians with their different kinds of arms. In fact, as well, the the Israeli settlers have been torturing the Palestinian people in different ways. And simultaneously, they are enjoying legal coverage. And for that matter, of course, they get impunity and they run away with what they do. In fact, many Palestinian people own cultivated lands that have olive trees which got burnt down. And once more, the Israeli settlers keep on perpetuating these acts because, of course, they get impunity.
Mr. Abdel Fattah, how has the Israeli government justified its actions in the West Bank despite the rising death toll and arrests?
In fact, the Israeli government doesn't need no justification. The Israeli project is now led by right-wing extremists. This project, as I had said, predicates upon what they called the plan of termination. And the Zionist Jewish leaders perceive this project as a roadmap. This roadmap has three main pillars, in fact, and the leaders said that the Palestinian people is before three options: either to subdue, to get displaced, or to die. And in fact, the Israeli right-wing extremists want once more to demolish all things Palestinian and to obliterate the Palestinian legacy and population altogether. And for that matter, the Jewish right-wing leaders abide by the Talmud extremist teachings in order to apply their annexation, their West Bank annexation projects, and to displace the population of Palestine from different territories. And for that matter as well, the Israeli government perpetuates its arbitrary practices and genocidal practices against the Palestinian people. In fact, the Palestinian people is not just right now facing military aggression, but it is facing and trying to counter the Israelis trying to forcibly displace this population and obliterate its legacy altogether. In fact, I would like here to commend the Egyptian state for its continuous pursuits to counter the expansion Israeli project. And I'm talking about the Egyptian authorities when they announced that they are 100% against displacing the Palestinian people into Sinai and are against terminating and liquidating the Palestinian cause by doing so. In fact, the Israelis, of course, tried to do that, and they think that they have American coverage, and they think that the president-elect Donald Trump, when he comes to office, he is going to help them operationalize this expansion project of theirs. In fact, the Netanyahu government perceives that it is in a state of power and that they can terminate and liquidate the conflict in their own favor. And so the Palestinian people has no options right now but to stay resilient and to consolidate their relations with Arab states in order to advance efforts and to get the international community to abide by international legitimacy. And of course, once more back to your question, the Israeli government does not need any justification for the aggression it is continuing to practice against the Palestinian people.
Sir, what are the economic consequences of Israeli policies in the West Bank, particularly in terms of the loss of population capacity and job cuts?
In fact, all these matters, of course, apply tremendous pressure on the Palestinian people economically. On the level of unemployment, there are tens of thousands of laborers that got redundant and have lost their job and cannot now make a decent living or any kind of living. And even the laborers and the personnel of the governmental authorities in Palestine right now do not receive their salaries regularly because the revenues of because the Israeli government receives the taxes on behalf of the national Palestinian authorities. And of course, during this process, they loot the revenues and the taxes and resources of the Palestinian people. Sometimes they actually give some of the revenues to the Palestinian government, and sometimes they do not. And they refrain from doing that under the pretext that they just want to protect themselves, or maybe or under the pretext that the government is subsidizing Hamas or got demolished altogether. And the Palestinian people are actually barely able to get by in life because of the arbitrary practices of the Israeli government and the economic siege imposed on the Palestinian people in the West Bank. This is an Israeli scheme that is unfolding on the ground in order to starve and punish the Palestinian people, and to punish, of course, the Palestinian people for what happened in the 7th of October.
Of course. Sir, how do you view the role of international bodies in terms of Israeli actions in the West Bank in 2024?
In fact, the international community should actually incur this responsibility. But as we see, the international bodies and humanitarian bodies are trying to get the humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. But the Israeli government keeps on blocking their pathways and keeps on preventing the humanitarian aid from entering the in order to or they keep on blocking the pathway and preventing the humanitarian aid from entering into the Gaza Strip. In fact, I would like here to commend the Egyptian state for what they have done after Israel has colonized and demolished the Rafah crossing from the Palestinian side. I would like, of course, to commend what they did when they decided to get the humanitarian aid through air landing into the strip directly. Of course, that was something positive, but still, what is happening right now in Palestine is a major catastrophe, and Israel keeps on looting even the humanitarian aid and the funds mobilized to help the population there. This is, I would say, the biggest robbery case in the world right now. And the Palestinian people are suffering beyond measure, and the international community cannot really, or is not really incurring its responsibility to help the Palestinian people. And so I would like to call on the international organizations, the humanitarian organizations, the bodies, to stand in the face of this Israeli arbitrariness and to impose sanctions on the Israeli state, because it keeps on violating international charters and instruments, and it keeps on starving the Palestinian people. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, why don't the international community organizations impose control over Israel and impose sanctions over Israel? In fact, this arbitrary support of the Israeli state is something that has to be stopped. Israel keeps on receiving support from a lot of West states, including, of course, the United States, to further escalate its aggressions. And we call on the Arab states as well to consolidate their stance and to respond to the initiative of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in order for Arab states to establish an international coalition backing up the resolution of establishing a Palestinian independent state along the borders of 1967. This work requires a lot of effort, of course, and we in Palestine are working diligently to in fact, to call on the international community to incur its responsibilities. But unfortunately, the Israeli occupation forces keep on dominating the scene and keep on perpetuating their genocidal and apartheid practices. In fact, Netanyahu does not really represent some kind of jeopardy to the Palestinian people alone, but to the entire administration of justice and to the international justice system and all peoples of the world, because he keeps on violating the provisions of international instruments. And this is something that can jeopardize the peace and security atmosphere of the entire world.
Yes. So what role does the withholding of Palestinian funds by Israel actually play in exacerbating the situation, making things worse for the Palestinians?
In fact, as I told you, yes, of course, the personnel and employees of the of the Palestinian national authorities do not receive their salaries in full. They receive meager salaries that can only sustain them over the first 10 months or less of their months. And in fact, the Palestinian employee is in a dire situation because they do not receive their salaries in full. And there are laborers, foreign laborers as well, that were working inside the Palestinian territories, and they as well have left Palestine, or some of them as well, some of the employers as well have been forced actually to release a lot of the laborers and to get a lot of their workforce redundant because of the extreme economic conditions that is imposed on them. In fact, the Palestinian national authorities tries every month to disperse the salaries of the employees in the midst of the great budget deficit that it is suffering from. And of course, all the service facilities in Palestine, for them to be operating well, they need constant subsidy from the government, which is not really available. And so we can say that the economic stature of Palestine is beyond dire. And we of course, need are all our friends and allies, friendly states and allies from the international community to get Israel to give us our own funds and our own resources. In fact, in a meeting at the League of Arab States a few years back, there was, or this issue was stirred, and the Arab states tried to help the Palestinian people by consolidating their efforts in order to cater for the budget deficit happening in Palestine because of the Israelis looting the Palestinian people's resources. And of course, once more, as you have said, the economic stature of the Palestinian state is beyond dire, and I have just explained to you how the economic stature of Palestine has been on the decrease because of the Israelis looting our resources.
Well, that was Mr. Abdel Fattah Doula, the spokesperson for Fatah Movement. Thank you very much for your valuable insights. In 2024, Gaza has faced an unprecedented humanitarian crisis as Israeli airstrikes and military operations escalated, killing over 40,000 Palestinians and displacing nearly 1.9 million people. Critical infrastructure has been destroyed and access to aid remains severely limited. With the continued Israeli aggressions and violations, the situation worsens, leaving many at risk of starvation and death.
Throughout 2024, Gaza has faced an unparalleled humanitarian catastrophe as Israeli forces escalated their airstrikes and military operations. Daily bombardments have claimed the lives of over 40,000 Palestinians, leaving tens of thousands wounded and countless others traumatized. The aggression has been most intense in northern Gaza. In October, Israeli occupation forces launched a comprehensive military operation in the region, imposing a suffocating siege. Since then, relentless airstrikes and bombardments have killed thousands of civilians and caused widespread destruction. Homes, schools, and medical facilities have been reduced to rubble. With humanitarian organizations, including the United Nations, repeatedly warning of famine and worsening conditions. Thousands of Palestinians remain trapped, unable to access essential supplies due to the blockade. The destruction of Gaza's infrastructure has been catastrophic. According to UNRWA, more than 90% of the housing stock has been partially or completely destroyed. Most hospitals are no longer operational, with only a few barely functional. The World Health Organization has reported severe shortages of medical supplies, leaving thousands without critical care. Schools have also been devastated, either destroyed or converted into overcrowded shelters. As a result, education has come to a halt, and thousands of children are grappling with the trauma of living under constant attack. Humanitarian aid has been severely restricted, with only 65 trucks allowed into Gaza daily by November 2024, far below the pre-conflict average of 500. Aid convoys have been looted, worsening food shortages and driving up prices beyond what families can afford. The population faces starvation and malnutrition as supplies dwindle. The displacement crisis has reached levels, with nearly 1.9 million Palestinians forced to flee their homes, many of them multiple times. Over 43,000 pregnant women are among the displaced, living in overcrowded shelters or makeshift tents with inadequate sanitation. As winter takes hold, the situation in Gaza grows even more dire. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency has warned that 1 million displaced Palestinians are at risk of death from the cold, compounding the suffering caused by what many have called a genocide. The year 2024 will be remembered as one of unprecedented devastation in Gaza, where the humanitarian crisis continues to deepen with no end in sight.
For further analysis on the situation in Gaza, we're joined from occupied Jerusalem by the Palestinian National Action Committee member, Mrs. Ratiba Al-Natsha. Welcome to Q News, Mrs. Ratiba. What are the immediate humanitarian needs in Gaza as of December 2024?
Tent, shelters, food, water, clean water, medical care, hospitals, doctors, a lot of needs. Maybe I can't mention all the needs because there's nothing in Gaza now. People living with no hope. The chances of living for thousands of people is very, very low, with no shelters, with no food, with no water, with no medical care at all in Gaza, especially in the north of Gaza.
How has the blockade affected Gaza's ability to receive essential aid, if we're talking about what Gaza actually needs?
Israel is closing all the entry points to Gaza, and they didn't allow any of these aids to enter at all. They even didn't allow for the medical staff to enter to Gaza to aid the people or to cure the people. They didn't allow the people to go out of Gaza to take medical care as it's supposed to be. They destroyed everything, every single thing. Even we can't even find like a way of there's no ways of living in Gaza at all. Israel makes everything very, very, very complicated by pumping people everywhere. No safe places in Gaza at all. They didn't cooperate. They didn't cooperate with the international staff and organization at all. Everyone is threatened in Gaza, even the international organization staff as well. So if we say how they double that, they cause that, and they aim to double it as much as they could, as if they want to let us have just two choices, even to die by starvation or under fire. This is the two choices that we have in Gaza now by the Israeli military actions.
Mrs. Ratiba, we have just seen in the report footage of how the educational system completely collapsed, the healthcare system completely collapsed. There are no schools, no hospitals to serve the population in Gaza. Can you elaborate on the impact of Israeli airstrikes on Gaza's infrastructure, particularly the healthcare and education? We have just seen the recent attack on Kamal Adwan Hospital and what happened to the staff and even the patients there.
Since the day one of this operation on Gaza, they targeted the hospitals. 25 hospitals out of 35 in Gaza got out of service in the first third of this attack on Gaza. But they continuously target these hospitals one after another time, as if they wanted to be useless at all. We witnessed a few days ago how they burned Kamal Udwan hospitals. Before that, they are surrounding and the Al Auda hospital as well in the north. They targeted today Al Ma'madani hospital. We witnessed how they attacked Al Ma'madani hospital in the beginning of this war. Then they means to collapse the health system at all in Gaza, to let no chance for the people even to be cured after they injured from these attacks. If we are talking about the schools, 70% of the schools destroyed completely in Gaza. The rest of the schools, they are now used as shelters for the people that they lose their houses as well. So we have no schools now in Gaza, but there's a lot of initiatives inside Gaza and inside these shelters to find like tents or places to educate people or children as much as they could. Because we can't lift like 64,000 child without education in Gaza, and losing another year after they lose a year of education in Gaza. So there's a lot of initiatives to use the internet and learning from far as much as they could, having like small classes as wherever there it's possible. A lot of volunteers is participating in this are participating in these initiatives to offer as much education as they could for the children in Gaza, because still this is what we believe in it. Rebuilding our country and rebuilding Gaza need people that are really full educated and have a lot of capacities and skills. So this is what we are trying to do by these initiatives, and with the shoulders of a lot of volunteers in Gaza. If we are talking about the water supplies, it destroyed completely. Israel is controlling now even the wells in Gaza, especially in North Gaza, letting the people without real sources of clean water or electricity at all in Gaza, as well as the internet and the communications is very weak, and most of the times there's no internet or connection in Gaza. So we are talking about destroying all the means of living in Gaza and returning Gaza to the Stone Ages, if we can say. This is what Israel is planning to do, to make Gaza a place that's impossible to live in it for years or decades after today.
We need to bring our voices to the whole world if we're talking about the situation in Gaza. How are the displacement crisis and the overcrowded shelters exacerbating the already miserable living conditions in Gaza?
So I want to describe the living in the shelters in Gaza. I'm talking about using like for more than 200 person per one bathroom, and more than that for showering. So we can't even have the opportunity of going to bathroom or to take a shower or having a personal hygiene in these shelters. People living in rooms that it's located and very crowded with people that they didn't know each other, and even they didn't meet before that. So you are losing even your personal space in these shelters at all. Women and children are separated completely from the men, so you can't find like a personal secure by not knowing anything about your loved one, like your husband, your son, or your other part of your family. So if I want to describe the living in the shelters, it's something unhumanitarian at all, but we are searching a light of hope in these shelters by trying as much as we could to find initiatives to take care of the young children while the woman is seeking food for their families, and maybe sometimes to educate the woman as much as we could to rebuild their living in these shelters and to take care of themselves and for them their health, as well as their young children as well. So if I want to describe the living in the shelters, I'm talking about people who are sleeping in rotation because there's no enough space for them to sleep at once in the same times, no enough beds or blankets or whatever to sleep on it as well. If we are talking about the shelters, we are talking a lack of heat now, or air condition in the summer and heating now in the winter. We are suffering from a very cold winter this year with no means of heating in these shelters at all. So it's a miserable life with a lot of complications. And when we come to the women and young girls, it become more and more complicated because maybe they will be used in these shelters because they lose their personal space and their personal security as well.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much, Mrs. Ratiba Nacha, for your explanation and how you describe the situation in Gaza. Thank you so much for being with us. In 2024, the United Nations faced significant challenges in securing a ceasefire in Gaza, with multiple resolutions failing to gain the necessary support, despite repeated calls for action from UN agencies and Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Efforts were consistently blocked by vetoes and a lack of consensus among Security Council members, leaving Gaza in a prolonged state of crisis. For further analysis on the international community's role and the United Nations efforts regarding the situation in Gaza, we're joined from Cairo by international relations expert Mr. Osama Shath. Welcome to Q News. Now, sir, what were the key reasons behind the U.S. vetoing ceasefire resolutions in 2024? I was asking you, Mr. Osama, if you can hear me. What were the key reasons behind the U.S. vetoing ceasefire resolutions in 2024?
At the outset, I would like to greet you and your viewers. In fact, the United States is, of course, the country with the most stature, with the biggest stature in the international community, and it should guarantee humanitarian or human rights. But this is not something the United States is doing. It keeps on vetoing ceasefire resolutions and as well keeps on refraining from helping the Palestinian people establish an independent state according to previous UN resolutions, which guarantee the Palestinian people their right to establish an independent, habitable state, according to meetings convened under the United Nations, which revolved around, once more, the establishment and the operationalization of a two-state resolution. In fact, it wasn't just the Palestinian people asking for the operationalization of the two-state resolution, but it was the entire international community calling for its enactment. The United States keeps on vetoing the two-state resolutions and the ceasefire resolutions, and it keeps on providing arms to the Israeli army. In fact, the United States, it transpires, has great interests in the region, and it considers the Israeli occupation forces, and this is something, in fact, Netanyahu himself has said when he frankly mentioned that he represents the American interests and the West states' interests in the region. And so the United States, for that matter, perceives the Israeli state as a diplomatic and military, an American diplomatic and military base in the region that is actually maintained to guarantee the American interests in the Middle East. And for that matter, we keep on seeing how the U.S. vetoes, how the U.S. keeps on vetoing not just ceasefire resolutions, but the United States as well keeps on rejecting or abstaining from voting on humanitarian resolutions. The United States, in fact, is not really abiding by its own constitution, mentioning that it is a state of justice, of course.
I get your point, sir, and unfortunately our time is up. That was international relations expert, Mr. Osama Shah. Thank you very much, sir, for your insights. And that concludes our 2024 wrap-up on the Gaza situation. Stay with us for continued coverage and analysis on the situation in Syria coming up next. And don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Q News EG to stay informed. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.